Oh, so last time we discussed about Azure Active Directory, and we talked a little bit about Azure as well, right? We you'll you'll did realize what Azure Active Directory was, since I asked you all for your homework to provision a tenant and then go into Azure Active Directory. So the reason for provisioning a new free trial tenant would be actually more evident when you go to the last section of this training, which is SharePoint. If you were to provision another Active Directory through your main tenant, which is Rapid Circles tenant, then you wouldn't get all these other features. In this particular scenario, you will get all these other add-ons as well. Yeah. So now today we'll talk about Azure Resource Group Management. And in resource groups, you have multiple layers of management structures. You have management groups, you have Azure subscriptions, you have resource groups, and you have resources. So the one that you would mostly interact with would be resources and resource groups. Azure subscriptions go at a more billing level, and management groups go at a more tenant-wise level, right? So management groups, they are good to manage access policies. It's like a big umbrella over multiple subscriptions. Your Azure subscription, it's more logical to users, where you can more logical to users and more catered to billing stuff, right? So you can have one multiple subscriptions in one tenant or one management group as well. Your resource groups, they are logical containers where you could have multiple resources within them. It's good for managing your projects and managing deployments. Finally, the resources, you will be mostly interacting with resources, predominantly services that you can create in Azure, like your virtual machines. You can have virtual networks, things like that. Yeah. So this is the structure. So it starts off with your management groups all the way on top. Then it moves to multiple subscriptions that you can have within a tenant. And then you can have multiple resource groups, and within resource groups you can have multiple resources, right? So this lesson mostly has a slight practical feeling behind it, because in your homework I let you all or I asked you all to provision a tenant and move a subscription from one tenant to another tenant, right? And I believe you all learned how to do that. So we look at management groups first. It it is management group. It's a way to structure or manage your multiple subscriptions. You can have multiple subscriptions in a tenant, and it would help you manage all those resources within that subscription. Right. Some things to note when you are dealing with management groups is all new subscriptions will be placed under your root tenant, for example, the tenant that you signed up for, and all subscriptions with a single management group must trust the same Azure Active Directory tenant, right? So the subscription that or the trial subscription that you're signed up for, that comes built in with one Azure Active Directory, and all the subscriptions that will be provisioned within within a management group must trust that same Azure Active Directory. So currently, when you're in Rapid Circles tenant, you can switch directory to a different tenant, right? The one, the trial tenant that you're signed up for. Yes, take silence as a yes. But you can in the same way you can provision multiple tenants, and you can move your subscription within each one of those tenants, and you can simply switch directories and move from one subscription or one tenant to another tenant. Yep. When we look at subscriptions, it's mostly used for billing. For example, if you have multiple departments or multiple projects running actually within your tenant, you can have multiple subscriptions, and then the subscription bears the cost, and that cost could be bear or bore by those projects, right? So subscription level is very good for billing purposes, and without a subscription you cannot have anything under it, which are resource groups and resources. This is something you would deal with more often, which are resource groups, and this is where it can get a little more interesting. So, whenever you provision a resource, you would need to place it in a resource group. Now, resource group, it's a logical container, so all your resources which are catered to one project can go into one resource group. For example, you can have a virtual machine, virtual network, you can have your databases if you want. Everything which is related to one particular mini project can go into a resource group. So this way you can group your resources, and if you go into Azure Billing, you can check based on your resource groups, which one of your resource, how much each one of your resources cost, right? Lastly, resources, which you all will be creating, many of them. For Azure Resources, you can create your web apps, virtual machines, you can create databases. This is predominantly what you will be working with. Yep. So whenever you have a project, you would first start by creating resources. Those resources will be, if you don't have a resource group, those resources would ask you to create a resource group at that very same moment. Yep. So this was a short session because it's mostly about arranging or grouping items, right? Just like groups, which will be our next session about security groups, where we'll place a lot of objects within security groups. So now we can get into a little bit of practical. If we come over here, prtl.azure, I am pretty sure you're all familiar with this. From our last session, did you by any chance create any objects in Azure? Maybe users or groups, something along those lines.
No, actually, I didn't.
No problem. Then I know what your homework will be. All right. So right now I have already switched. Although my home tenant or home Active Directory is Rapid Circle, it for you it would also give you an option to change to a different directory. My directory is here, which I moved my subscription to. Yep. So if I want to provision resources, which is your first level, you can create resources over here. For example, virtual machines. You can create, if I create a virtual machine, it would actually ask me to for a resource group. Let me show you. Create Azure virtual machine. So over here, the first one, it asks you for a subscription so that you can be billed. The next one, it asks you for a resource group. If you don't have a resource group, you can create one right here. I do have some test ones, so you can create a test. Yeah, I just added to a test. You'll need a virtual machine name, and this is everything after this is is about the resource that you're creating. So if it's virtual machine, it will ask you what type of virtual machine, and if they are virtual networks, it would ask you other things related to virtual networks. However, these two categories would always be there, which is subscription and resource groups. Yeah. So hope you all got an understanding of how to manage Azure resources or the Azure structure. If you'll have any questions related to this boring topic, but yeah, any questions you can ask me now.
Sure, we'll ask. But as of now, I don't have any queries.
All right.